All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going through a series of video presentations that I'm creating based off of the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. I'm up to the Tools and Testing section, and as you can see, I'm under the Understanding Client-Side Web Development Tools, and this is the Client-Side Tooling Overview. And again, this is meant to be an introduction. All right. I would guess that the majority of the things discussed in here, I have gone through some of them, but there'll probably be a lot I have not gone through. All right. So in this article, we provide an overview of modern web tooling, the kinds of tools available and where you'll meet them in the life cycle of web app development, and how to find some of these tools. So writing software has become more sophisticated over time. As it says, it is still entirely reasonable to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript by hand, but now there are a lot of tools that can help speed up the development process. All right. Some are well known, some are not as well known. Okay. It says it's easy to become overwhelmed by the sheer number of tools that can be included in a single project. Equally, a single configuration file for a tool like Webpack can be hundreds of lines long, most of which most people at least probably wouldn't understand, especially when you're first starting out. All right. From time to time, it says here, even the most experienced web developers get stuck in a tooling problem. It's just going to happen. In these articles, it says we won't answer every question about tooling, but the idea is to provide a starting point in some of the fundamentals. All right. So again, today's modern development tooling ecosystem, like the web itself, is huge. So as it says, it's useful to have a broad idea of what the main problems the tools are solving. It says if you jump on your favorite search engine and look up front-end web developer tools, you're going to get over 1 million hits. Let's just try it just for the heck of it. So I'll go into Google here and I'll put that in and hit enter, and it comes back with 159 million hits. All right. So you know there's a lot of stuff out there. It says, though your choice of code editor is certainly a tooling choice, this series of articles will go beyond that, focusing on developer tools that you need to produce web code more efficiently. All right. They're breaking it into 3 broad categories to solve: safety net, tools that are useful during code development; transformation, tools that transform code into some way, as it says, for example, turning intermediate language into JavaScript that a browser can understand; and post-development, tools that you can use after your code has been written, so you can, for testing and deployment type of things. All right. So as mentioned, there are tools that make the code you write a little better. And when you say a little better, I mean, we're talking about automating, and sometimes they'll find errors for you, etc. All right. As mentioned here, this includes anything that will make the development process easier with respect to generating stable and reliable code. An example right here that they show is linters. Now, one of the packages that I've been using throughout here off and on has been Visual Studio Code. All right. And I've even gone in and done not a lot. Let's see, do we have it? Yep. I've done a little bit as far as going in and downloading some of the extensions and tools that are available. But if I go out here and I click this manage and I go to extensions, notice that I can type in, among other things, jslint. Well, maybe it's 2 words. jslint. How's that? There, jshint. I thought there was a jslint on here too. There it is. All right, integrates jslint into Visual Studio. So if I click install, all right, notice it's an extension, and it looks like it's in here already, so it may come by default. All right, it says it's enabled globally. Good. All right, and it says here, it looks for a global NPM installation. Yeah, that's fine, of jslint. Let's take a look right here and see what they talk about with. What is jslint? Now, it says set in here someplace. Read the instructions, how JavaScript works. All right, here we go. jslint is a JavaScript program that looks for problems in JavaScript programs. It is a code quality tool. Now, one thing about this, all right, is what jslint basically does is it looks through your code for possible problems. All right, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. The good news is, if you've got major problems, it'll find them. The bad news is some of the problems it finds are not problems at all. All right, and what I mean by that is, notice what it says here. It takes JavaScript source and scans it. If it finds a problem, it returns a message describing the problem. All right, and let's just take a look at an example. So where was that? So if I come through here, here's some source, okay? And if I hit jslint, as it says, it'll do linting, and it says there are no warnings. Well, the point is, if I come in here and start changing the stuff that's here, for instance, I'm going to take the word let and make it var, which you shouldn't do, but I'm doing it on purpose. And I click jslint, and now notice, well, it still tells me that there's no warnings. Typically, I know that in the past when I've used this, it does flag that as a warning. All right, but what I'm trying to get to is one thing with jslint, it's real particular. For instance, it likes the curly braces here. And at least in the past, when you moved your curly braces over like this, all right, the linter would grab that and it would flag it as a warning. Now I'm looking here, it says unexpected trailing space, all right, res on. There it was. So see, it found, it marked that basically as a warning, even though there was nothing wrong with doing it. So what I'm saying is, when you run jslint, at least in a way, you're at the whim, so to speak. All right, you are at the whim of the person who wrote the linter tool. All right, now I showed you jslint. There's eslint. All right. And I don't know if eslint is available inside of Visual Studio Code or not. So let's type in eslint, and you'll notice that that's in there also. So you get jslint, which is a linter by default, but you can also add eslint, and you'll notice there's even a prettier eslint, which I believe will not only lint your code looking for errors, but it'll try to make sure everything, once you save it, etc., is kind of lined up, your curly braces are lined up, etc. So it says it analyzes your code to quickly find problems. It's built into most text editors, and you can run it as part of the continuous integration pipeline. Many problems eslint finds can be automatically fixed, but as mentioned, you can customize it to do other things as well. All right. It says there's other linting tools as well. CSS lint, there's web hint, so there's a lot of different things that are available. All right. Source control we're going to talk about later on in a later module, but as it says, source control is known as version control system. The idea is twofold. First of all, if you're the only person working on a project, and you will always be the only person, maybe you're in a one-person shop, for example, you can, let's say that you're working on a code solution, and you work on it, you figure it's going to take you 2 weeks. So the first day you get about 10% done, okay? Well, what you can do then is you can save what you've done thus far, all right, using Git and GitHub. Typically, that's the way it's done. And what'll happen is it'll save it to you out in the cloud. So if the next, so you'll have a copy of it on your local machine and a copy of it on a server someplace out in the cloud. So if the next day you're working on your work, and let's say that you somehow screw it up, so your internal copy becomes corrupted, you can always go out to the cloud and download the one that you'd saved previously. The other time that this becomes really important is when you're working with multiple developers on the same project. Each one of them can take out their own copy of what's called a master version and make their own changes, and then push their changes to the master, as an example. So as it says, GitHub is probably the versioning control system that's used the most, and Git is a source control code system, or a source code system that's typically used with GitHub, but it can be used with other products such as GitLab and Bitbucket. As it says in here, they're going to use GitHub, which I think is a real good idea. All right, code formatters. As it says, they're similar to linters, except rather than pointing out errors, they try to make sure that your code is more aesthetically pleasing. And you'll notice it says prettier is a common option. And another one, again, that we can add and quite often do is prettier. All right. And it looks as though, let's see, it's enabled globally anyway, the prettier formatter, but there's a lot of other prettiers that you can install as well. And it'll try to make sure your code looks aesthetically pleasing. All right. Bundlers and packagers. All right, it says these are tools that make your code ready for production. For example, tree shaking to make sure only the parts of your code that you actually need are there. An example, another example, as it says, there is minifying, to show you very quickly the difference between something that's minified and something that's not. I'm going to go out to jquery.com. And when I go out here and I'm going to say I want to download jQuery, I can do it in two ways. I can do it in an uncompressed format, which is kind of what you're used to seeing. And you'll notice this is a JavaScript library, and it's pretty big. All right, it's thousands of lines long. But if I don't want that, I can take the compressed version. Now, this is the same file, but it's been minified, which means all of the unnecessary white space to the system has been removed. The advantage of minifying is your code loads faster because it's a smaller source code size. All right, so that's the big advantage of doing that. All right. All right, and they mentioned there's another tool here called Parcel. It can do the above tasks, but it also helps to assist package assets like HTML, CSS, and image files into convenient bundles so that before you deploy them, everything is done together. Webpack is another packaging tool that we use in the AWD 1111 class. All right, transformation. As it says here, this stage of the web cycle allows you to code in either future code or code using another language entirely, such as TypeScript. If you look here, TypeScript, as it says, typed JavaScript at any scale. TypeScript is an open source language which builds on the JavaScript. Some people love it, some people hate it. I don't know very much about it because I've never used it. Generally, web development can be thought of as the three languages. I usually liken them to a three-legged stool: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, the only one of those that is 100% mandatory is HTML. You can create yourself a website with HTML, with no CSS, and with no JavaScript. It won't look very nice, but you can create it and make it function. Typically, you have at least HTML for content, CSS for aesthetics, but you may or may not have JavaScript. If you don't have any JavaScript, you won't have an interactive website, because that's what JavaScript brings to the table, is the interactive activity. All right, so transformation, as it says there, offers two main benefits: the ability to write code using the latest language features. Examples include Babel and PostCSS. Babel, as it says, is a Java compiler that allows developers to write their code using cutting-edge JavaScript. One of the things that Babel does, I believe, is it allows you to take your JavaScript, and if it wouldn't work with older versions of so if you're working with older versions, it can help bring them up to code. Let's just leave it there. There's also PostCSS, which is similar, but whereas Babel works with JavaScript, PostCSS works with CSS. The option to write your code in an entirely different language. An example here is Sass. Sass basically takes CSS and, for lack of better words, almost makes it a programming language. because you can use things like add your own variables into it. All right. Then there's TypeScript. And as it says, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. What does that mean? That means it gives you everything that JavaScript gives you and more. Finally, there are frameworks, and of the three that are mentioned here, the only one we're going to talk about is React, because starting in the fall of 2021, we're going to give you an intro to React in the AWD 1000 class, and we use React in more depth and breadth of coverage in the AWD 1111 class. But React is an example of a framework. As it says, it provides a lot of functionality for free, and it allows you to customize and build things up on top of regular JavaScript, oftentimes also known as vanilla JavaScript. All right. Then in post-development, as it says, it makes sure that your software makes it to the web and it continues to run. This is where you want the least amount of active interaction. So once it's configured, you basically just want it to run. So we'll talk about testing tools. And as it mentions there, these are tools that typically take the form that will automatically run tests against your code to make sure it's correct before you go on. Why? Because the earlier in the process you find errors in your code, the cheaper it is to fix them, first of all, and you want to find errors in your code. You don't want to release it to the public and have the public find errors in your code. All right. There are testing frameworks like Jest, Mocha, and Jasmine. There's automated test running and notification systems like Jenkins, for example. Deployment tools, as mentioned here, allow you to get your website published, are available for both dynamic and static sites. A dynamic site, again, would be one that has interactivity into it, probably has quite a bit of JavaScript, whereas static sites has a minimal amount of JavaScript, and static sites are designed not to be changed, or at least not to be changed often at all. All right. Netlify, as it mentions, is one of the most popular tools, and I think that's the one they're going to use in here. All right, there are other tool types that can be used in the post-development stage, such as Code Climate for gathering quality metrics, WebHint browser extension for performing runtime analysis, GitHub bots, and there's other things. Google has its own metrics, for example. All right, some thoughts about tooling types. There's certainly an order in which these types that you use them in the development life cycle, but rest assured you don't have to have all these in place. All right, it often takes some time for new developers to settle into their own complexity. In other words, for them to understand what they're doing, the tools that are available, and how to use them. One of the best known tools, Webpack, has a reputation for being overly complicated to work with. All right. There's definitely no silver bullet, as it says in here, to guarantee success. But as your experience increases, you'll find things that you like to use, things you're comfortable with, and those are probably the ones that you'll concentrate on. All right, how to choose and get help with a particular tool. Most tools tend to get written and released in isolation. So you'll want to go and be able to what? Well, Google's a good place to start, of course. You want to talk with people who have used it. You want a useful, specific place to search. Typically, for example, let's say that I wanted to know more about Webpack. All right. So I type in Webpack and notice it's webpack.js.org. Well, that's a great place to start. All right. Just Googling something, as I mentioned, there are usually forums for this stuff, and there's usually websites. Yeah, as they mentioned, CSS Tricks is a great site for all things CSS. Dev I've never used. Free Code Camp, not only are they a nice site, but they also have free videos, sometimes several hours long, on a lot of different stuff. So again, if I'd come out here and I'd go out to YouTube, and I'm going to say Free Code Camp, how about build a website? And you'll notice HTML full course in 2 hours. Creating a website for beginners in 2-point-some hours. This is Kevin Powell. I've taken courses from him before, and he's very good. All right. So that's it for a summary on this. So as it says, this rounds off our gentle introduction to the concept of client-side web tooling. from a high level. Next, as it says, you'll get a crash course on the command line. So that's next. We'll pick that up in just a couple minutes.